Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another product spotlight. Today, I have a returning guest. I have Bryce Geisel with Koch Agronomic Services. Bryce, how are you?
I'm doing well today. How about you, Tracy?
Good. I am so happy to have you back. Before we dive into our great conversation, do you want to tell our audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure, absolutely. So, as Tracy mentioned, my name is Bryce Geisel. I'm the Senior Agronomist with Koch Agronomic Services, and I cover that from a Canada standpoint. So it's a big task, but it's an interesting one. I'm not sole. There's a whole team of Koch Agronomic Service employees across the country, but what I do is I do focus on more of the agronomy side. So I get to work with our team. I get to work with farmers, retails, agronomists, researchers right across the country. So it's a really interesting role. I get to see agriculture, right from a whole Canadian perspective and get to learn a lot from everyone who's farming across the country. So
And you're being so humble. You got to put speaker on there. You were just speaking on stages across Canada, a lot of different roles.
no, absolutely. I have to wear a lot of hats, but it's good. It's a great way to be out and talking to people and seeing what's going on and finding out about agriculture. So no, it's absolutely, it's a fun thing to do.
I'll keep you busy. Okay, why don't we dive into what we want to talk about today? WOLF TRAX DDP. Can you tell us about this product, what it is, and how it works?
Sure, absolutely. So WOLF TRAX DDP, and the DDP stands for dry dispersible powder. So it is a form of micronutrients that you can utilize on your fertilizer. So this gets added onto the fertilizer that you're already using. So if you're using like a nitrogen or phosphorus, potassium, sulfur blend, you add this in, and it is a way to introduce micronutrients into your field on using a process you're already doing. You already have a nutrition plan for your crops. You can add it in and get a way to put some micronutrients in there. And there's a number of different ones you can choose from. So there's all the different nutrients individually you can choose from, as well as there's kind of a combo product as well if you're kind of just looking for maybe a little bit more general type nutrition. But if you want something more tailored, you can definitely choose one, or you can choose multiple that can be added together. It's definitely a product that can be used to really enhance those crops' access to micronutrients if that's what's needed on some of your fields.
Excellent. So we are having this conversation in perfect timing. We're coming up to planting season and everybody's getting excited, getting ready to get out in the field. So as farmers are thinking about their main inputs, NPK, what else should they be considering for planting season?
So obviously, I think we're kind of going down a path here because we talked a little bit about wolf tracks and micronutrients, and I think I want to just kind of talk a little bit about nutrient balance considerations,
Mm,
and that really kind of focuses on kind of that depletion of nutrients from your crops in the fields. So I think it's kind of a different way to look at it. We kind of tend to think of, okay, we got to add this, we got to add that, but let's kind of maybe step back and think about that nutrient balance. And the way I like to think about that is thinking about your field having kind of a nutrient budget. I'm a bit of a numbers guy, so it kind of makes it easier that way. If you think of it as a bit of a budget, and there's going to be varying amounts of plant nutrients that are going to be added to your field, whether you're adding it through fertilizer, but also through mineralization, crop residues, manures for those who are using those. So you can be adding those in. So you've got those added into your budget. And then you're also going to have those subtractions from your field. So that's going to be where you're going to be removing it. The crop's going to be taking it up. It's going to leave your field as grain. There could be immobilization that is happening. So that's where it gets tied up. So nutrients don't tend to stay one way or the other in your field. They're kind of becoming a plant available and they're becoming plant unavailable as well. They're kind of moving back and forth. So we kind of have a lot of things that are happening. And that's where kind of that nutrient balance is kind of going. And, we've been adding a lot of nitrogen, but hopefully phosphorus. I know some fields maybe not as much phosphorus. Potassium tends to cycle. Some fields are higher, some are lower, same as sulfur. So we're adding a lot of those in, but are we adding in some of these other nutrients that go in there? So that's going to be kind of a big piece to that nutrient balance is, what other things do we need to add that we haven't been adding? Because as you take those crops off, so that grain is coming off, or if you're taking the straw or you grow hay or silage and you're taking all that kind of residue off the field, you're going to be taking all those nutrients with it. And so that's kind of something that we need to have consideration is, how much of being taken off and for how long.
love it. We had a conversation a few months back, and that was a great one too. I'm going to link it in the show notes for anybody that missed that one. We chatted about micronutrients there, but I want to go back into that. Why are micronutrients important?
Yeah, micronutrients are very important. They're just needed in smaller amounts, and I think that's kind of what sometimes people get a little confused about. Like we tend to categorize our nutrients in three ways, and I think I might have referenced that in the last one as well. We've got our macronutrients, our nitrogen, our phosphorus, our potassium, our secondary nutrients, sulfur, also calcium and magnesium, and then our micronutrients. What are our micronutrients? Those are boron, copper, zinc, manganese, molybdenum, iron, chlorine, and nickel tend to be the ones that we kind of talk about. And even within those, some are probably more well known by farmers and agronomists and retails. Typically, boron, copper, zinc tend to be kind of the more commonly thought about ones. And they're very important because they're involved in all the different plant metabolisms and functions that are going on, root and shoot growth. They have photosynthesis they're required for. Both making, the tissues as well as actually involved in the chlorophyll and all that biochemistry part of it that actually goes from taking, sunlight and carbon dioxide and making, the plant carbohydrates and oxygen, flowering, grain fill, creating protein. So they're involved in everything. But as I mentioned, they're very small amounts. And I thought maybe today I might throw out just a few examples of how much some different crops might need, because it's kind of good to put in a reference because, we think of, how many pounds of nitrogen we're talking, are we putting out 60, 80, 100, 120, 200 pounds, depends on what crops we're going, right? How much is it from micronutrients? So maybe kind of some rough numbers, and obviously it's going to depend based on your yield targets and everything else, but just kind of keep in mind, I had on here, so wheat crop might need about 15 grams per acre of copper. So it's a very small amount, like we're talking grams.
Yeah.
Canola might be 200 grams of boron. Again, that's per acre. Soybeans for manganese would be a very similar number. Corn for zinc, we think of as corn and zinc, that often gets talked about from there. That's about 250 grams per acre. So again, when we talk about very small amounts, it is very small. We're sub-pounds on all these different micronutrients. But the thing is, they're just as important. It just needs the grams instead of the 100 pounds or 40 pounds or whatever it might be. So
Thing. I love talking to you. Everything you tell me about this is so interesting. Okay,
I'm
so
glad.
yeah, building on that, let's go to the obvious. Why is soil testing so important in determining micronutrient deficiencies?
Well, soil testing is a great way to get that snapshot of what you have going on in your field. Like you're going to be able to look at some numbers and kind of see where you're sitting. And if you've been doing it for a lot of times, and maybe you have some soil tests, your agronomist or retail has those soil tests, maybe you want to go back and ask, maybe go back, 5, 10 years, whatever it might be, and just have a look at those. You are going to see fluctuations because nutrients within there are going to have some fluctuations because a lot of these nutrients will get released and tied up. So, sometimes in wet years, you get a little more release, a little more dry years, you might get a little more tie up. You might see a little bit fluctuations, but you should kind of be able to map out a trend on how you're going. So that's kind of the first step, is kind of having a look. And then you want to kind of look, how is that in terms of sufficiency? So sufficiency is kind of that line we've kind of have that where we've got deficiency and then we've got enough in there. And so if we think about sufficiency, we've got enough to grow a crop, but we're not having a lot of extra spare nutrients might be in there. So talk to your lab, talk to your agronomist, because those numbers are going to depend on which way the lab is doing the extraction. But they'll be able to give you what their sufficiency ranges for each of those micronutrients. And from that point, you can kind of start to think about how do we kind of approach that now? Are we too close to that line where we're maybe just sufficient that we want to be thinking about? We want to maybe start to do making sure we're monitoring it. Maybe we're still doing well, but if you've looked at that trend, we've started to see a little bit of erosion, which would make sense. We tend to see that over time as we take those nutrients off and don't replace them, especially on years if you're taking extra off due to maybe, like I said, hay or straw or something along those lines. You might be taking a bit more of those off. And or are we in the deficiency standpoint? And each of those are going to have a bit of a strategy. And that's where that soil test is going to be able to help you, because it's going to give you that direction you want to go. Do we need to go, are we on a maintain plan? Are we on a build plan? Or maybe you're lucky and you don't have to worry about it yet. The numbers are very high. And that could be because you are utilizing other sources. Maybe you're using manures and stuff and returning certain things. So that's where it's definitely not a one size fits all, but the soil test gives you a really good starting point to be able to kind of manage that supplementation as we kind of go forward. And that's going to be a big thing because it's going to be a very different strategy if you were on the build side because we're deficient or very close to deficient, we're maintaining. And hopefully you're just going to be in that maintaining standpoint because that's going to be a much easier situation to be in is if you just need to provide a little bit of those nutrients because we talked about how small it is. We're basically just focused on, maybe kind of a crop removal. How much is the crop taking off? Because that's going to be, again, a portion of that nutrient, that amounts that I told about. Some of it's going to go off on the grain, and that's going to be the removal. The rest will stay in the residues and will get cycled back into your fields over time. So if you're in a maintained situation, that's in a pretty good spot to be because that's a very manageable. Where things get a little more complicated is if you're in that deficiency. So maybe you look and you're kind of on that red line. You're not quite there yet, but it could be a couple good crops. And you could be in trouble. And we have to be concerned about that because, again, going back to Liebig's law of the minimum, right? Whatever that crop hits in terms of the lowest level first, if you're short on zinc and you hit that spot first, even though we have lots of nitrogen, phosphorus, water, sunlight, your yield's going to be capped because that is going to be the limiting. If we get into that situation where we need to build, that's definitely a little bit more intensive. And it's not a 1 year process. That is going to take, it's going to be a longer term process to get those fields back up into a spot where we don't have to worry about that in the future.
Okay. Thanks for sharing on soil testing. So we've got the soil test. Do you want to talk about farmers and how they know if they're choosing the right product? Do you want to go there next?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, choosing the right product. And that kind of follows up with what I talked about with are we maintaining, are we building? Those are going to be the questions. And I kind of think of, if choosing the right product, kind of looking at maybe 4 different categories. There's maybe some other ones, but there's 4 I'm going to focus on at least today from this point, anyways. And the first one is going to be rate, because that is probably the biggest one. Is what are we doing with that test? Is it a deficiency, sufficiency? Are we maintaining with it? Because a build out for that deficiency program looks very different than that maintain program. As we talked about the start, the crop only needs those grams per acre. Whatever the number might be based on your yield goals. And the nutrient and the crop, because those are all going to play into that. As we kind of have that and we're in that removal, the maintain program is really just, we're going to figure out how much we think we're taking off. So if we're taking off, X bushels of your crop, and that takes away whatever it might be, 50 grams of it, okay, per acre, maybe next year we only need to think about adding, roughly that number back. And that way we're in that maintain level, right? We're not building, but we're not losing. We're just kind of keeping our micronutrient levels the same. So that's kind of probably the best place to be in because it's easier to maintain. If we need to go to a deficiency and we're in a build, now we're going to have the program, we have to overcompensate, right? And not all of that's going to be available because there will be tie up because there's going to be microorganisms and everything else that are going to want to utilize some of those nutrients as well. So there's going to be a lot more competition. So that's why it is that longer term build strategy and adds that added layer of complication on trying to get there. So if we can kind of get to the maintain situation, it's where we want to be. And that's how I think of it. We're just going to stop the mining of the soil. Like we're just going to keep things status quo. We take, X many grams off, we'll add X many grams back in per acre. And we know that, in the future, as long as we keep doing that, we're not going to be a situation that we're going to have to worry about trying to reclaim that field in terms of building those levels up again. So that's kind of the first part is rate. So if we kind of want me to keep flowing through my kind of different categories here.
Yeah, I love it.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. So next, let's focus on distribution. So distribution can be a bit of a problem because we talked a bit about the grams, right? Now, when typically we think about putting 100 pounds of nitrogen out or pick whichever number you're kind of comfortable with on your farm, we know that's not a lot of, fertilizer granules in that acre of field. Like it feels like you're a lot, especially when farmers are having to pay for it and everything else and apply it and put it through their air seeders or everything else, it feels like a lot of product. But really, when we look at the amount of prills out in the field, it's not very much. So now if we take that even smaller, that becomes very difficult as well. We can get a lot of, spread between. So that's where distribution becomes a bit of an issue, and we have to kind of manage that. And that's where sometimes some of the, the soil recommendations for micronutrients, they might say, well, I've always been told I need to put 5 pounds or 10 pounds down of a micronutrient. And it was never about that's what the crop needed. That was probably a distribution. They needed to put, that was the minimum down to at least try to get that fertilizer spread evenly across the field. So that's where, there's been some advancements, some technology changes into using these products like WOLF TRAX DDP, where you can coat that over the blend you're doing. So if you're putting that already down, whether you're broadcasting, put it in a band, side band, mid-row band, whatever it might be, you can coat that on, and we're going to get a lot more of that nutrient spread. It's going to be closer out for the plants to find. They're not likely to have to search as far to find that because there's going to be a smaller amount per area. You're not going to get kind of those spots with a larger amount, but it's going to be distributed more evenly across the entire field, which allows each of the crops a little bit more access to it. So distribution is one. And again, that's a much easier in a maintained situation. If you're in a build situation, now we have to really kind of focus on multiple other strategies where we're probably looking at distribution amounts, and it becomes a little bit more of a complicated because we want to get to that surplus. So those are something to consider on depending what you're doing on your fields as you go. Kind of the next one's going to be availability. So availability of those micronutrients, because not all sorts of the micronutrients are going to be available at the crop at the same time. So for example, we can have salt form. So something like a zinc sulfate as an example, as a salt form, that is going to be immediately available once you put it in the field because it is in that salt form. That crop can find that zinc in that example right away. So it's an immediate availability form of it. The thing is, if the crop doesn't quite need it, like the timing in terms of is too early or the crop's not really utilizing it, things get delayed. As that zinc sits there available, it's available for everything else. So microbes can pick it up and they can start to immobilize it. So over the whole season, so you're going to have a lot of early availability with a salt form, but over time, you may end up in a situation where it gets immobilized and not be utilized. And then we have something that you'll often hear is oxide. So that's the other form, is typically the oxide form of micronutrients. And here, these are not immediately available, which is it's good. They're not going to be immobilized or anything, but they're not available for the plant either. And they have to become available. And there's processes, typically, it's reactions within the soil from crop roots, with some of the organic acids and stuff they'll exude as they're kind of growing through the soil, and some of those pH things will play into that oxide, and those will become available. So those are kind of your longer term availability. So not available right up front, but a little bit later. So that's where you kind of have to balance what it is we're trying to do. And different micronutrients do require different timings. That is something to consider as well. But typically, we try to manage that. And that's something, going back to like WOLF TRAX DDP, they use both forms. So if you get a zinc from WOLF TRAX DDP zinc, it's going to have that salt form and the oxide form. So you're going to get a little bit of both as an example. Is a one way to kind of manage that availability piece as well. And then kind of the last one I wanted to touch on is efficiency, because that's always big for farmers is efficiency. So farming, obviously, as everyone who's probably listening to this is well aware that it is a very time sensitive business, and so not adding that extra application is probably going to be an advantage if you're in that situation where you don't have to go and make another, pass across the field, because it's probably hard enough keeping that sprayer going, with the wind days, rain days, unfortunately breakdowns, things that happen. No matter what equipment we're talking about, it will happen at some point. So efficiency is a big thing. So that's where, if we can look at how do we manage micronutrients and utilize something that we're already doing. And that's where, using, again, a product like WOLF TRAX DDP, it coats what you're already doing, your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your blend, your starter blend, whatever it might be. There's no extra application on the field. So it is a easy and effective way to add micronutrients to the nutrient plan program that the farmer is already doing. So those are kind of the four buckets that I kind of think about for choosing the right product.
Interesting. I'm curious, do you talk to your friends and family about this all the time? It's so it's so fascinating.
Well, sometimes, I do try to convince, some people, anyone who will listen, on some of these different things. But sometimes it maybe over Thanksgiving dinners and or Christmas isn't always the best time. But as you got to try what you got to try. And some, when you're passionate about something, you kind of want to talk about it. And I try to spend a lot of time learning too, listening how what people are doing, and I will definitely adapt. And when I hear interesting things from farmers and what they've done, I definitely look into that and try to build, and add that into there as well. So I love having these conversations with people and kind of learning and adapting and trying to provide some information because I think, we're all trying to make agriculture a little better and make farmers, a little bit more productive and more efficient in what they're doing. So.
I must be a farmer, just geeking out on this stuff. If you look at it, I mean, nutrition and nutrients are the foundation of life. And for me, as a person, for livestock and for plants, it's just so fascinating, right? It goes hand in hand with our end result. So I love having these conversations. We've covered a lot, Bryce. We've covered more information about WOLF TRAX DDP, micronutrients, why they're important, soil testing, choosing the right product. Are there any parting words, parting thoughts you want to leave with our audience? If so, go ahead, and then I'll do a final call to action. If farmers want to learn more, how can they do so? So I'll throw it right back to you.
Sure. No, absolutely. I think the big thing, I want people to think about is nutrient use efficiency. I think, we tend to think a little bit, on terms of making sure the crops have, the things we need, but how do we do it more efficiently, both from a field piece where, the plants will be able to efficiently get it, but also from a farm piece, efficiency there. I think it is important that we kind of look at nutrition planning for the crops, holistically. Obviously, the bulk of the time will get spent on the nitrogen, the phosphoruses, where, that's going to be the big ones, but we can't lose sight of some of these other ones. And again, fields are going to be different. I know it gets hard as people do try to manage those efficiencies. The easy button is, one thing for all the fields, and especially, one crop, all the wheat fields get one thing. But I definitely think, there's been advancements. You think of VR, and I think, nutrition is the same thing. We do need to think about how we manage maybe different fields, different parts, different crops very differently. And I think that's kind of going to be a big thing with it. And, one of the things we do is we try to provide information on there. So, you can definitely go to our website at kochagronomicservices.ca, and you can find information on WOLF TRAX itself or some of the other ones. But we do have some agronomic articles on there too. There's some education pieces that farmers, agronomists, retails can go and look through and see if there's, maybe some learnings they can get from that as well. So.
Perfect. So we'll put links in the show notes as well. So if you're listening, watching, you can go to Farm Marketer and then access it right there. Bryce, as always, this has been fascinating. I love you coming on the show and sharing your wisdom. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. You guys in the audience, if you enjoyed this as much as I did, like it, share it, and get it out there so other farmers can hear what Bryce has to say. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.